Okay, and we should be live.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hold on
All
one
right.
second. I just want to make sure the sound had some issues. People in the chat, say something there, Shannon, now.
All right. Let us know if you can hear me in the chat.
Yep. And if we can hear that, sorry about that. That's my fault for selecting the wrong audio source. Then I might actually get you to reintroduce yourself, Kathy, just so people can hear you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Bonjour.
Just one second. I just want to be absolutely sure people are actually hearing you now. Okay, we got the sound. Okay, go ahead.
Super. Yes. Hi, everyone. So I'm Kathy Intro of My Polyglot Life, and I'm a French language coach and content creator. I'm the host of the podcast My Polyglot Life en français, and I talk about society, mainly French society, a bit of Canadian society as well, with a feminist and decolonizing perspective. And I also talk about how to learn efficiently, and I like to make grammar simple because grammar is just a tool. We want to get it over with, make it simple, and focus on communication, expressing our ideas, creating relationships with people all over the world. And that's my philosophy, and I think that's about it. I will also speak French, English, Spanish, I'm learning Japanese, and I've studied German in the past and a few other languages, just to dabble in those.
Excellent. And Benny?
Yeah, for you guys who don't know, I started Flute in 3 months, but the challenge, we inherited it originally as the Add One challenge, and we've kind of put the Flute in 3 months spin on it, and it's been amazing to see all of everyone else's stories and sharing their progress. It's always inspirational, and of course, you know me from the Flute in 3 months blog and all of my travels and YouTube videos.
Great. And I'm Shannon Kennedy, the head coach of the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. And since the audio wasn't going during my intro, this is the finale for the 15th ever Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. We are going to give all of our finalists the opportunity to ask our panelists questions, and then we're going to announce the winner of the 15th Fluent in 3 Months Challenge at the end. So now that we've introduced our panelists, I'll go ahead and go over to our finalists. So our finalists for this challenge are... One moment. We have Sidel, Laetitia, Patrick, and Larry for the regular challenge, and our advanced polyglot finalists are Caleb and Ashley. So Caleb and Ashley were not able to join us on the call today, but we have all 4 of our regular challenge finalists. So I'm going to give you each the opportunity to introduce yourselves. Let us know your name, what language you learned, and what you got out of the challenge. I'm going to go in the order that I see you. So I'm going to start with you, Sidel.
Okay, yeah, my name is Sidel, and I worked on improving, trying to level up my Irish, to working on a, getting to a B1 level. I think I'm close, and And I'm sorry, what was the other question? Was it?
What you got out of the challenge?
So much. A lot of self-discipline, and was probably one of my weakest areas. So learning to be self-disciplined, learning about habit stacking, learning about tracking my daily tasks, and that was something I was almost allergic to. So that, and then the community was just so awesome. Having not just the community, but to be accountable. It was a huge piece for me. So, and there's so many more things that I got out of it, but those are some of the highlights.
Thank you so much. All right, Patrick.
Okay, I'm Patrick, obviously. I tackled Russian, and I am still aiming at becoming A1. I would be pleased to call myself a beginner in Russian, but I'll get there. Yeah, I think everything Sidel said. Having made that commitment to spend a couple hours a day, 4 days a week, that weighs on you. I mean, that doesn't, well, sort of weighs on you, but it keeps you accountable, and it keeps you going back to the computer and back to your work. Whereas if you weren't doing this, if you were doing it on your own, I don't think you'd spend that kind of time. So it's really good for that. And the community is just, it sort of speaks for itself. It's amazing to have, and that adds to the accountability, because you don't want to let, your fellow linguophiles down, especially your teams and stuff like that. But it's just an amazing community. And yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. Laetitia?
Hi everyone, my name is Laetitia. This time around I learned Vietnamese. And I guess, I'm gonna repeat a little bit what everybody said, but what I got out of this challenge for me mostly was this huge community of language learners. It was really amazing to do this thing together. People having this community to fall back on and just to geek about anything that has to do with language.
Thank you. And Larry? Unmute your microphone. Yeah.
So I was learning French during the program, and first of all, I'd like to mention and acknowledge the coaches that we had during the program. Just tremendous resource in terms of teaching, coaching, providing resources, even providing charts for us. And so it was tremendous. And the people that were in the program with us, our colleagues, were so supportive and so encouraging and so motivating, many of whom are here right now. So it's wonderful. And the accountability, the yay, nay list we did every night, whether we did something or didn't do something, was so important to keep us going, so we didn't, lose ground at all. Just another thing that I really enjoyed was having the people that I was in the program with, regardless of the language that they were studying, just provide different kinds of resources. I never knew about Paul Noble, for example, in his course, and how good it is and how gentle it is and how approachable it is. So just all kinds of things came from this program. Just tremendous support, motivation, encouragement. Just really fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to get into our question portion of the discussion today, and we have several questions submitted in advance. So we're going to go ahead and start with a question from Caleb, who was one of our advanced finalists. And Caleb's question was, since both you, Shannon, and Benny have studied 10 plus languages, but of course, Kathy, this question is for you as well, I have several questions about maintenance. So what specific criteria or considerations do you use to decide which languages to maintain, which to improve, and which to let stagnate?
What do you think, Kathy?
Tough question. I just go with my guts and whatever I'm motivated to improve or maintain. Like last year, I took a break from languages for years, and then I got back to it 3 or 4 years ago. Last year, my focus was on Spanish because I participated in a lot of events. I wanted to be able to interact with the people. So I wanted to step up my game in Spanish. Then it got to a point where I'm comfortable having a conversation. So I switched to Japanese. It's taking a long time. And at some point I want to introduce a new language. So I'll have to let go of Japanese. And I think for me, maintaining the language is keeping in touch either by listening or reading or both. That's pretty much all I do until I'm ready to move back into more intense studying.
Yeah, and for me, it's tricky because I've dabbled in, I think, over 30 languages. So there's just no way I could possibly be consistently maintaining them all. So I have basically narrowed it down to the 6 or 7 that I do want to keep on my long list. And those are the ones that I try to have. I've tested it out to do like 1 a day for a week, but that was too overwhelming for me. So my process nowadays is generally to do all of my languages within a 2-week period. So I might have 2 days for one language, and within that 2-day period, I'll have an italki lesson. I'll have some studying sessions. I'll review my notes. I might go read a book, or take a grammar book or something. And after all of that, I feel like I've gotten that language boosted up a bit. So that's when I'm in maintenance mode. And when I'm ready to take on a new language, I don't really necessarily ever aim to push my languages up to improve them, as it were, during a maintenance period. I always prefer to be either just maintaining or intensively focusing on one language. So I switch in and out between those 2 different modes. I know, Shannon, you've got a better kind of approach for taking on many languages. So do you want to talk about that briefly?
Sure. So I guess first for me, what languages I focus on depends on what languages I need at the moment. So for me, a lot of the time, the languages that I end up learning are languages that I need for work. So I'll have a music company say, hey, we're going to send you to India. We need you to do a presentation in 4 cities. Can you prepare like your presentation in Hindi? So I have something very specific that I'm working on, a very specific purpose, a very specific deadline. And that's the way that I often study many of the languages that I've taken on, at least in the last since I started working for Fluent in 3 months. I learned Spanish to be able to reply to emails and everything in Spanish. So that's been quite a few years now. It's and essentially where I need to go, what languages I need to speak, those constantly change. So 1 year I'll go to Hungary twice. I need to keep my Hungarian active. I'll be doing a lot of demonstrations and presentations with the Japanese music company that I work with. So I need to keep my Japanese up. It all really depends. But the one thing that is very consistent is I never really get the opportunity to only focus on one language. I very often am learning a new language and having to maintain several languages. So what I end up doing is working on more than one language at the same time. And I've come up with a system that really works for me. And so what this is I essentially have a language that I spend the most time with, and that's whatever the newest language is or the most immediately needed language is. And then I just have language contact with several of my other languages. So language contact to me is just doing daily vocabulary study and a lesson once a week. And I don't really do anything else. And that's mostly just to maintain what I've learned and not stress out about learning anything new. It's more about not losing what I already have. And of course, in doing that, you naturally start to pick up new vocabulary, new grammar, new things without having to do any deliberate study. It's kind of similar to the comprehensible input method, but then I'm spending the bulk of my time focusing on whatever the immediately needed language is. So for me right now, actually, because of the way everything is, I haven't needed to learn a new language for work in about 6 months. So I've actually have the opportunity right now to kind of focus on Russian, which is a language that I'm learning for myself. And that's my focus language for right now. So I spend about 80% of my time reading in Russian, speaking Russian, studying Russian. And then my other kind of maintenance languages like Hungarian and Japanese, they just get that one lesson a week with a tutor and then vocab study in between those lessons. And the vocab that I'm studying is a vocab that comes up during the lesson so that way I'm kind of compounding on what I'm spending time on in those lessons. All right. Patrick, you have a question.
Actually, this has been rendered redundant almost. My question was, I have put a language or two on the back burner, and I've devoted this year to obviously starting Russian, but I also want to get my Spanish back. So my original question was asking you guys, is it better to, devote an entire week, alternate weeks with the two languages if I'm only doing two, or 2 days a week, 3 days a week, that kind of thing. But I like what you're doing with the, to maintain, just keep doing one thing a week, just to maintain it. So maybe with my Hebrew, I'll try to bring that back and get back to reading the Bible in Hebrew and stuff like that. But for Russian and Spanish, that was sort of my question too, is like alternate weeks, divide the week into halves somehow, or what, but.
I think in general, it's down to experimentation, because like literally Shannon and my approach is different, but what we found is what works most ideally for us. So it's not like there's a right answer that we can tell you, oh, you have to do a half a week in one language and a half in the other. You're a fool if you do 1 week of a language and 1 week of another. It's an experimentation. You'll see what you get momentum with, and that's what I would advise for that.
Do you have anything to add to that, Kathy?
No, I like having, when I'm studying two languages at the same time, I like having both within 1 week, but I know I'm going to get confused and the vocabulary of one is going to go into the other. So it's just about, I accept that it's part of the game, and I like having both, but one will always be more intense than the other.
Yeah, like Benny said, I just recommend experimenting with it. Like Benny alternates days for languages. He'll do Spanish one day, French one day, something else the next day. For me, you still want that time gap, but I don't separate them by days. I get to each of them every day, but I wouldn't have a Hungarian lesson and a Russian lesson back to back, because then when I'm saying yes to my teacher, I'll be using the little words especially are what trip you up. So I try to, at a minimum, have an hour between my language lessons or study sessions. So that way I have that little bit of a gap to make that code switching that needs to happen. All right, Sadell.
Okay, so I was wondering if you had any tips for those of you who are bringing back a language that you were once fluent in, but you haven't spoken in eons. I mean, in my case, close to 40 years. I mean, I've already met with a teacher and I've kind of gotten a little bit, taken my temperature a little bit of where I am, but it's not exact. And I just like, where even to begin? It's like, because it just feels like starting with a beginner's course book is just, I'm going to just die of boredom.
Have you had a break from a language, Kathy, that you've been able to go back to?
Yeah, so Spanish, I stopped. I studied 2 semesters at university, then didn't speak it again, or didn't study it again for 15 years. Then being French, I could still understand Spanish when I started again, but then I was going to these language meetups and I could understand, but I couldn't reply. So that was very frustrating. And so I picked up a grammar book and I looked at the points that were tripping me up the most, like the present tense, to get me back into the game and be able to have simple conversations. And then I started consuming, I put my phone into Spanish settings, so my phone was talking to me in Spanish. I re-immersed myself in the language and it started coming back. And even every now and then I go back to the grammar book and check some very specific points, the ones I know that tripping me up in the conversation and that are blocking me, and I want to address those, and everything else I don't really care. I'll keep that for later if I want to. German, I'm on the fence. I was speaking it to I was writing it to B2 level probably, and it's very tempting to go back to it, but as we mentioned in the previous question, how do you choose the languages you study? I don't have that call to study German, but it's frustrating to know I have that potential and I choose not to. So I would probably process the same way with German if I wanted to reactivate it, same way as in Spanish, and get starting I would get starting to speak first and see where are the gaps.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on the language level. Like for languages that are A2 and B1, I would personally have more patience to pick up an absolute beginner's course, not going through it at the same pace that I went through it originally, but to give myself a good reminder. So it's I know it can feel frustrating because like you're not an absolute beginner, but you could still pick an absolute beginner book that you can get through in like a few days. Whereas an actual absolute beginner would take weeks or months to get through that book. So that way, you know, you'll be flicking through, and like Kathy says, you can pick and choose. You can decide. You can hone in on the grammar points. Generally, that's something I would do when I'm at a higher level of the language, because I know if I've taken a break from a language like German, for instance, for a few years, I know I don't need to go back to the absolute beginners, but I do need to polish up some grammar points that I've kind of slipped my mind. So in that case, in the intermediate stages, I would use a grammar book, and I would almost like a combination of seeing what are the issues I'm actually having in my spoken sessions, and this grammar, like the genitive or whatever, is driving me crazy, so I'll give a dedicated study session to that. Or even I personally do have the patience to just start from page 1 and kind of turn the page until I'm like, yeah, I know that. Come on. And then I'll get to, oh yeah, hold on, how did that work? And I might do a couple of exercises. And then another great thing is to talk to your teacher and ask them what they think your weaknesses are. Because I personally can be very biased. I can think in my own head, oh yeah, I know that thing. But then I keep making the same mistakes over and over again, even though I did actually genuinely know it a few years ago. But if my teacher's like, you really need to just fix this grammar point, it is frustrating, but I accept it in that case. So a few things you can do, but I definitely wouldn't write off going through those beginner books. Just keep in mind you can fly through them. You can get through them in no time, and you'll be glad you did, because there might be some more like really simple things that you just aren't coming to your mind, and just by seeing them in that beginner context, you've reminded yourself. So that's generally what I would suggest.
Okay.
Have you taken a big break, Shannon, from languages that you've had to implement a strategy with?
Yes, and actually I was going to mention this. So a while back, one of our other Fluent in 3 Months team members, Holly, was trying out an Italian learning resource, and I was the only other person on the team who spoke Italian, but I hadn't studied it for about 6 years. And so I did a quick 3-day refresh to get my Italian back up to speed. And my Italian was school Italian. So I studied music. I had to learn how to read scores in Italian and read primary resources in Italian. I never learned to speak the language, but I learned to read and write and do research in the language. So not only did I have to get my Italian back up to speed, but I also had to start speaking it. And so I documented everything that I did to pick Italian back up. And I can share that post with you, Sidel, so that you can kind of see exactly what I was doing to get it back up to speed. But if you are learning one of the 4 languages that the language hacking book exists for, it is an amazing tool to get kind of conversational quickly and do a bit of a refresh. But like Benny said, getting a really easy grammar book for the language or workbook of some sort, you just like literally just speed through it, because what happens is, 1, you start to remember what you learned before, and then 2, you actually better understand what you learned in the past, because like that period of refreshing and going back over it, you'll find that you have a better grasp on it with that little bit of distance, and it'll help you a lot. And then also you just get through the book so quickly. It's like a nice little sense of accomplishment that you can give yourself at the beginning of picking a language back up as well.
Thanks.
All right, Larry, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. So Shannon, I know that you're a musician, and perhaps the other 2 are as well. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, I've been involved with music, vocal and choral music, since high school, and continue to be, and that's been one of my passions. And I've tried to use music to help me with languages. You're trying to get into the flow of the language, the pitch, the intonation of the language, phrasing of the language, things like that. So I'm just wondering if you could tell me, panelists, or anybody else, I guess, here, how you use music, how you integrate music with your language studies.
Very good question. Kathy, what's your experience with music?
I'm a terrible singer. I don't have no sense of rhythm whatsoever, but I do sing in my target languages, and it helps me. I was already advanced in English, but when I started teaching English, I did a few pronunciation exercises and I would practice singing. And it helped me improve my pronunciation even more. And then, yeah, Spanish and Japanese, or that's all I sing. I haven't tried any other language, but I also am very sensitive to the rhythm of a language. That's why for me, listening is very important. I noticed that if I listen a lot in one language, my thoughts, I don't have the words to put those thoughts in words necessarily, but the music of the language will be in my head, and I can notice definitely if I skip listening for one day, my spoken performance is a lot worse the week after.
Yeah, my personal experience with music has definitely shown me the advantages of integrating the two. And it's really shown that, like, if I think of my language levels, probably my best two languages in terms of like pure skill, like vocabulary and grammar, would be Spanish and French. But the one that people tell me I have the most authentic accent in is Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. And the reason I hear that much more than I'd ever hear it in Spanish and French is not because I studied more in Portuguese, but because at the end of my last long stay in Brazil, I had a music teacher help me to learn everything you mentioned, the musicality, the intonation, and it was just absolutely fascinating that instead of getting a native speaker to teach me how to, say grammatically correct sentences, she taught me how to sing in Portuguese, and she pointed out things I wasn't aware of, like people who speak Germanic languages like English, we have a very choppy way of saying words. But when you're speaking Portuguese from Brazil, you go up and down and connect your words together. And this just, I got into that pattern of letting go of any inhibitions I had of like, oh, I don't want them to feel like I'm making fun of them. And when I say something like I just said, I say that with nothing but love of how much I embrace the sound of the Portuguese language. So if at all possible, if you can connect with somebody with a musical background, have them correct you. And they are going to be, even if anything, more experienced in helping you to work on your accent than somebody who's a professional teacher of the language. Because teachers know a lot about the content of the language, but not necessarily about that flow of the language and how it sounds. So music teachers definitely have that extra kick to their step. So I would find them if you can. They're just as good as any other accent trainer would be. And Shannon, you've obviously got plenty to say, but what's been your overlap with languages and music?
So, I mean, the biggest overlap was when I was at university and I was doing field work where I had to live in France and speak the language and do research and conduct interviews in the language, and get to know musicians and attend Festnos and do all sorts of things like that, like where it was just a bunch of research-oriented things, learning the words to songs, figuring out what they meant, writing papers about them. But I'd have to say that this might seem really ironic given that I'm a professional musician, but I don't really use music that much to learn languages. And I suppose for me, there's an element of it that because I'm a musician, I might be a bit of a music snob. And so also I find that when music's going on, I concentrate on the wrong sorts of things, like more on the structure of the songs than like the words. And so it's not really been a tool that I've used. There are phases where I will set aside some time and try and find music that I enjoy in the language. And it's not necessarily to do any deliberate practice with it, like study the lyrics, learn the lyrics or anything, but it's just to have the sound of the language like present more often for me. So for example, I would have like a Chinese music playlist and I would listen to it. And, you know, naturally what ends up happening is like I'd end up learning some of the lyrics, and you know, as it's going on, I'd be sitting there rapping in Chinese in my car while I'm driving. But it's not something that like I've actually, I can't say I've ever really like gone to find the lyrics for these songs and sit down and learn them as a tool for learning the language. So I guess for me with music, because of what I do, it's more music is a language island for me, which is, you know, because it's such a big part of my life and something that I do, I study how to talk about it, but I don't necessarily use it itself as a tool for learning for a variety of reasons. It's also why I can't listen to music when I'm working, because otherwise I'm like this going, I feel like writing a song right now, and then I'm not working. So yeah, that's probably a bit unexpected given that I am a musician, but that is my question or my answer. All right, so we have another question that was submitted in advance from one of our participants, Barry, who says, does the natural method by Steve Krashen work? And does the TPRS method work? So the TPRS method, Kathy or Benny, if you aren't familiar with this, I also had to look it up on Wikipedia, but it's broken down as TPR storytelling, which is a method for learning foreign languages. It's where you use a mixture of reading and storytelling to learn a language. So essentially this is a method teachers use to teach students. It's not necessarily something I think you could do on your own. The teacher needs to combine reading and storytelling for the student. So what your thoughts are on these two styles of learning / teaching, and if you've tried either of these, and what your thoughts are on comprehensible / compelling input versus TPRS.
Kathy?
Vast topic, learning methods. I feel there's some truth to all the methods, and some methods may work better for some people. Definitely Stephen Krashen's philosophy is at the base of what I do, but I also integrate other methods. I believe that TPR, everything involving the body into the learning, helps us. It involves more senses. The more senses we involve in the learning, the better we remember and the better we make it our own. So really a bit of everything, mixture of everything, keeping us interested, engaged, and living with the language it works. And storytelling is, I think that's also at the base of what I do, is we tell stories. Basically, the learner tells me stories, I react to those stories, and then we go into a conversation and we learn how to combine the words to make stories, because that's our whole life is about stories, and we connect with each other through stories. So definitely stories are a good tool to learn, but we also need to add bits and pieces of other things to go faster, to go even faster with our learning, I feel.
Yeah, I've got a very interesting history with this entire subject, because when I first started blogging, my whole learning philosophy of Speak from Day One was presented by a lot of people as a stark contrast to the Krashen philosophy of comprehensible input, that you kind of build upon what you know. And initially there was that kind of clash of, you know, you're either, you know, with me or you're against me kind of thing. But I really feel that the language learning world does not exist in these dichotomies, that you are doing one thing or another. I think that Krashen's research serves a very important purpose, because the time that it came out in, remember, was like over 30 years ago, I think, was when his research originally came out. And back then, it was contrasting with traditional academic learning, which really needed to get pushed back on. So his was a very fresh approach to that. My personal approach requires speaking from day one, because I think, and I have unfortunately met people who've embraced the Krashen philosophy so much that they refuse to speak, because they are kind of putting off the speaking part of the experience until they've had enough comprehensible input first. And like it's either an input or an output thing, as it were. So that's kind of I've got a long history with all of this, and I personally met Krashen. I had a lovely dinner with him at one of the polyglot events. So we definitely, when we saw each other, we're going to be like, okay, put him up. It's you versus me. Like we got along great. I absolutely loved the guy. He gave a fascinating talk. But ultimately, I think a lot of what he has to say is very, very important. But it's also important not to take these learning philosophies to the extreme. With stories, I am a big fan of this learning philosophy. It's come out a lot, especially recently with Ollie Richards. He's published many series of books that have taken the story aspect of language learning into that beginner experience. And it does make a big difference because I think all these new aspects of using our language contrast with very old traditional methods where you would just be presented the words in boring contexts. And like, you know, with Ollie's books, he has the story that you can get invested in, and it makes it more interesting. So anything that gives you that personal investment in the language is going to change your approach. But ultimately, there is no, this approach is right, this approach is good, this approach is bad. Like for me personally, speak from day one is the only way I could do it. And a comprehensible input approach from the very beginning is a terrible idea for me, but it's obviously worked spectacularly well for many other people. You know, like Steve Kaufman is one of the best examples I can think of, whose learning philosophy is based very primarily on Krashen, and it's worked very well for him. So it depends on your goals. It depends on your what you get enjoyment out of with the language. But you should definitely experiment, and if you find value in the story learning approach, integrate that into your learning. If you find value in a more comprehensible input centered learning philosophy, absolutely embrace that, while not closing yourself off from anything that may contrast with that, because you know, we're, as human beings, we're not computers that follow algorithms that must have very strict specifications on exactly how we learn things. It's a spectrum of some things are useful for some people, and you just have to find what's useful for you.
Yeah, I like to kind of stick to the atom that what's the best learning resource or method, the one that you're going to stick with, and that's the one that you should use. And for everyone, that's going to be different, because really, if it's something that you can stick to, be consistent with, it's going to have the biggest payoff for you. So that's where I stand on that.
Yeah, and that kind of emphasizes for me when I first got into this. A lot of people were saying, but the comprehensible input worked for me, and I'm like, of course it worked for you because you stuck with it. So that's kind of what made it work. So I definitely would echo that.
Yeah. All right, Ashley, I saw that you.
I may add something to that question, Shannon. Sorry. There's also a different way of using the language. I know I'm more of a listener, so I'm happy with understanding a lot and being able to get by with the speaking, but my focus generally is not so much on speaking, but rather on understanding and asking people questions and then listening to their stories. So it all depends on your goals, as you said, Benny. It's just find where you want to be and what works.
All right, Ashley, I saw that you joined us, and we like to ask all of our finalists to do a quick little introduction. So if you could introduce yourself, share what language you were learning and what you got out of the challenge.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Workday is responsible for my lateness. So my name's Ashley. I was doing the Polyglot Challenge, focusing on French and Spanish. French is a language that I learned in high school, left it behind for, well, years. I'll let you calculate how many that is, and then came back to it on and off over the last year or so, and I kind of wanted to get it up to a more, you know, intermediate, high intermediate level where I can, you know, have a conversation without checking Google Translate every 5 seconds, only every 15 seconds now. And Spanish was my quarantine project, so I just figured this challenge would be a good time for me to really just kind of push those languages up a notch, so to speak.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, Patrick, you had another question?
Yeah, I know this is going to be, it's an idiosyncratic thing, but regarding time's duration between challenges, like again, I have dedicated 2021 to Spanish and Russian, so I'm not going to do another challenge this year, but I guess there's no hard and fast rule, but you have things you can go by with your gut, like, okay, now I think I'm ready. I can add another one without, you know, totally erasing the others type of thing. I guess, or is it totally individual?
I mean, I never worry about erasing my other languages unless they're at low levels. Like for me, there's a certain point that I have to pass where I feel like that language is not going to get interfered with too much with my other languages. And that point is B2. So rather than just kind of gauging for myself, you know, oh, should I spend 3 months at this language or 1 month at this language, or should I like maintain 2 languages? I know I can step away from a language and know that it's safe and that I can return to it after a while and get back to it without having lost too much momentum if I've gotten it to B2. And this has been my learning project for many, many years. Was not necessarily 3-month projects because initially I didn't have the right learning approach, that sometimes it would take me a whole year or two to learn a language. And I would keep at it until I got to B2 level, because any language I've not gotten to B2 level, I have very quickly forgotten it. I find the half-life is a lot shorter if I've gotten it just to A2 or B1. If I take a break, then the level drops dramatically. Whereas if I take a break from a language that I've gotten to a B2 level, I can take a genuinely long break and it won't suffer too much. So that's kind of more the way I like to think of it, that I can maintain multiple languages and so on, but if possible, I'll keep coming back to the language that I really need to get to B2, because that's going to be the one that is going to suffer the most from a break until I get it to B2. What would you do, Kathy?
Good question. But as you mentioned, yes, everybody has a point where you feel that if you take a break and you reactivate the language, it's going to come back. So I think that's a good idea to bring it up to that point. Then I had a thought and it went away. It's okay. So reactivating and losing a language. Yeah, sorry, the thought's gone, but I'll wave at you, Shannon, if it comes back.
Sure. For me, I always think of languages as a bit like riding a bicycle. If I don't ride a bike for 5 years, when I get back on, I'm going to be unsteady. I'm not going to be feeling as confident or as comfortable on the bike as I would have been if I hadn't taken that break. But I know that that skill of knowing how to ride a bike is there, and that if I, spend a little bit of time each day riding, that eventually I'll be able to turn tighter rather than having to like loop out to make my turn, or I'll be comfortable on like inclines a little bit more than I had been a few days prior. So the languages are the same. When you first pick them back up, you'll see things and you'll think, ugh, I knew that and I've forgotten it, or like I'm supposed to know this, but it all kind of comes back together. And I think you'll be surprised how quickly it comes back. So for me, especially at 15 languages right now, I can't study all of them every day or even every week or even every month. I have to let some of them go. And I just, especially after that Italian project, I trust now that if I said, okay, I need German right now, or I need Hindi again, that it'll be there and I can pick it back up. And the pain of relearning it is not quite as significant as the pain of learning it the first time, because you do have that background, that knowledge, and those connections already there. It's just a matter of pulling them out of the vault in your brain. It's, your brain just files it away farther back, and it needs to be told this is important again. So it brings it to a more accessible area for you. So that's been my experience.
Thank you.
Okay, the thought came back. Sorry. So it was about bit tied to what you're saying about the pleasure and stress. We want to keep stress away. So if you feel good about starting on another project or challenge right away, just go for it. Find ways to maybe keep in touch with the other languages, depending on how much time you have. But if you have limited time, you have to make choices. And if you feel good about the choices that you make, then you're not putting extra pressure on yourself. And when you'll be ready to reconnect with that other language that you dropped for a while, then you'll find back that pleasure, and you'll have the drive to, as Shannon mentioned, to get back on that bike every day and take the actions that are necessary. So it's all about having that self-confidence and owning your choices and feeling good about everything you're doing. There's no wrong choice if you're happy with that choice.
All right, Ashley, you had a question?
Yes, sorry, just had to find the mute button. When you were talking about leveling up languages for in certain levels you have to reach before you feel comfortable that it's yours to begin with. Do you ever have a moment when you feel like you've just the gear clicked and it's like I have leveled up, I have made it that one step further? Or is it just you don't realize it while you're in it, but then in hindsight you look back, it's like, yeah, I jumped up one.
This is very tricky because this, I feel, depends on the person's own level of self-criticism. Like, if you're a very confident person, you're more likely to quickly say, I've reached this level. Whereas if you are more of a perfectionist, you'll be constantly saying you're not good enough. So personally, I would only really judge that I've gone up a level if an unbiased other third party has told me so. And it's one reason why I really like the CEFLR exams that you can do on these A1 through C2. You can even do mock versions online. You can talk to your teacher to do it informally. But I like those exams because no matter how good or bad I think I am, they're going to help me. But in terms of like eureka moments, I've had my own eureka moments, but they've never necessarily been, eureka, I'm at B1, you know? It's never really been that. It's been more that I can do a particular thing. Like my very first experience with Spanish, I had a eureka moment. Oh my God, I can speak Spanish even though my Spanish is very bad. And not necessarily a eureka for I've leveled up, I'm at the next level, because it's the kind of thing that is just so gradual that it's imperceivable on a day-to-day basis that you will, when you look back, notice it, notice the progression. It's one of the reasons why one of the core aspects of the challenge is that people have snapshots, that we have a day 0, day 30, day 60, day 90, because if you looked back on the last 3 months, you may not have felt your progress, but if you look back on these videos that really distinctively say, here's where you were at the start, here's where you are now, and here's some snapshots along the way, you will see that progress. So I think as far as it's an interesting question that I think realistically, in retrospect, we can see our progression, but there's never really a moment where you level up, as it were. It's more a case of like, the more time and energy you put into it, the faster you're likely to level up, and you will see that in retrospect. Well, what do you feel about that, Kathy?
Yeah, exactly. What you mentioned is super important to have those milestones and this way to make the progress visible, because when we're in it, we can't really see it. So it's good to look at it in hindsight. And also because level is very conditioned to the topic. Like you can be a B2 in a subject, be very confident in many aspects of the language, and then a new situation comes up and you're like, I can't speak anymore. You're blocked for some reason. So levels come and go, and they're very flexible. I don't like exams. I'm one of those people that I don't know if I'm very confident, but I have a level in my head. I have this image of the level I have or where I want to be, and that's my radar. I go to that point where I feel good about it, and that tells me if it's the right level or if I needed English for work, but it went up gradually. I don't have, like Shannon, I don't have projects like you where I have to learn that language within a certain time frame. It's more like pleasure and self-imposed language learning. So I have that freedom of choosing what I want to do and where I want to be. But if you need to reach a certain language within a certain time frame, as you said, Benny, time and energy you dedicate to this language will bring the results, and then the exam will sanction your level. And the teacher, before you take the exam, a teacher will give you feedback on whether you're ready to take that exam or not. And exam also, there's a lot of psychology going on. So you can have the intrinsic skills to nail that exam, but if you're too stressed, then you're going to fail. So it's a delicate balance between a lot of things, and it all depends on your goals and what you need the language for.
Great. I'm going to skip my answer so we can squeeze in one more question from Larry.
So we've been talking about juggling 2 or more languages. And Benny, you early talked about Ali's short stories. I think you mentioned the short stories book. This is the French book, but I went through the German book first a couple of years ago and went through all the stories. And now I'm studying French, and I realize I can use, because they basically use the same plot, different locations, different geographical locations, but it's the same plot. So I'm using the German to help me with the French. And I know I think that's called laddering. Is that, anyway, is that something that would be useful in terms of trying to integrate 2 different languages, one that you've had some exposure to and one you're just now learning? Does that make sense to kind of use one to kind of...
Generally, laddering, we understand laddering more as the source material you're learning through is in itself a language you've learned as a second language. So since both of Ali's books are teaching through English, wouldn't necessarily say that's laddering, but you are definitely building upon a language you've already learned. And I've had that experience myself, that like even including English, that I found Spanish very, very difficult to understand on TV. For the longest time, they spoke too fast for me. At the time, there weren't podcasts that I could slow down or anything. So it was very hard until I turned on Los Simpson. And when I watched The Simpsons in Spanish, they were talking just as fast as every other TV show. But I had seen the episode before. So what you're talking about, this plot line, it gives you that advantage. That I had that advantage with the plots, and I also somewhat remembered the script of the episode for some of the episodes. So like I would be like, that's how Bart says eat my shorts in Spanish. Wow. And it kind of, it gets you a bit more invested, and it also gives you that extra edge, which can really take a lot of the pressure away. So that's I would definitely think that's a great approach. If you have some familiarity with one thing in one language, whether it be a second language you've already learned or even your mother tongue, that can kind of take a lot of the pressure off. And I feel later on, it's great when you start a book or something that you've never read in your target language. But I generally don't do that myself until I'm at a much later stage. In the earlier stages, if I'm going to do reading, I'll read something that I've already read. I'll read The Little Prince, for instance, in the small book in the other language, because I already read it. I know what they're going to say, and it does give me a bit of a leg up. Kathy, what's been your experience with kind of overlapping content between 2 languages?
Yeah, absolutely. If you already know what's going on, if you have the context because you've read it or done it in one language, it's easier to focus on the language, the new language, the target language, because you don't have to focus on the content so much. You can focus on more details and really trying to understand that language. And the more connections we can create between all the languages we know, the better for our brains to make sense of the information and to store it, to remember it. So I know, like in Japanese, when I'm learning Japanese and I'm learning a new word or a new concept, I try to link it, if possible, to a French or English or Spanish word, for example. So it might get confusing at times, but generally, the more languages I have under my belt, the faster I'm able to learn other languages, because there's so many connections you can make. And generally, reading translations to start with, or watching like American movies with a voiceover in French is, like most of my clients find it more useful than watching straight native movies, because they're familiar with the way American movies go and they kind of know the script as well. It's rom-com, we've seen the type of movies 10 times, so we know what's going to happen, and we can really focus on listening to the language. And depends on the translations, but some translations try to stick to the original language, and then that makes it easier to see the correspondence between the two. And like you mentioned, oh, eat my shorts, that's what it is. I think that it might be a way to progress faster in terms of vocabulary. And then going forward, moving on to full native topics. But like, I wouldn't learn, I've tried doing Duolingo from Spanish to Japanese. That was challenging because my Spanish wasn't at a level high enough that I could be comfortable with switching from one to the other. So I would learn a new language from either English or French.
All right. So thank you so much for all of your questions, and thank you, Kathy and Benny, for your answers. We're going to now get to the moment that I'm sure all of our finalists have been waiting for. But before we announce who the winner is, Benny and Kathy, do you have any final words of encouragement for our participants?
Yeah, I would say that this, we were saying before the call, was an especially hard one to pick a winner for, because everyone did such an amazing job. We were so impressed with the amount of work and effort that everybody put into it. So whether you're in the finale or you're another participant, you should feel so proud of how far you've come in these last months. And something I do like to say, especially lately, is that for so many people during the pandemic, they'll look back and it was just time wasted or time they put on weight or something. But everyone who's taken this challenge can look back and maybe also say at the time they put on weight, but at the same time, they can say, this is the time that I pushed my language skills up a notch. And that's something you can take with you for the rest of your life and turn this dead time, as it were, into something useful. So you should feel very proud of that. And Kathy?
Yeah, I was absolutely amazed by everybody's performance. And what I really liked was like everybody had clear goals, and then the analysis, the self-analysis you all did at the end was very insightful, and you learned so much, and you know what you've learned from this challenge. You're going to take that into your language learning and your life in general. And that was really something very heartwarming to see that, and really interesting to see everybody's different points of views and perspective on things. Thank you for inviting me on this panel, Betty and Shannon.
Thank you. All right. So today, our winner of the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge is going to get $250 in italki credits, as well as admission to their next Fluent in 3 Months Challenge. And our Advanced/Polyglot winner is going to get 6 months of Link and admission to their next challenge. So Benny's going to help me out here, because normally I do a keyboard drum roll, but he's got something special set up for us today. So the winner of our regular challenge is... So on the call, we can't hear it, but on the live video, you'll hear there's some drum roll audio. All right, so the winner of our challenge is Patrick. Patrick, congratulations. You are the winner of the Fluent in 3 Months Challenge.
No way. You're playing with me.
Nope.
Oh, that's beyond unexpected. I mean, look at these guys. Look what they did.
You all did amazing.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Patrick. All right, and our winner for the Advanced Polyglot Challenge is Benny. All right, our winner is Caleb. Caleb wasn't able to join us on the call today, but we will let him know after the call is ended. So congratulations to everyone on all of your hard work. You all did really amazing. We were so impressed with your progress over the last 90 days. And if you too are watching this and you would like to have a 15-minute in your conversation language, you can learn more at fluentin3months.com/challenge. Before we go though, Kathy, do you want to let everyone know one more time where you can be found?
So you can find me at mypolyglotlife.com and the podcast My Polyglot Life en français on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and the major platforms.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you in an upcoming challenge. And until the next time, happy language learning.
Happy